Lewiston was founded as a result of the need to supply miners. The miners wanted to be a lot closer to the gold fields, which were up the Clearwater River, but the boats couldn't safely moor farther up the Clearwater. The water was too high in May of 1861, and they would break their mooring lines. So they came down to what seemed to be the most convenient spot, which was at the confluence, where we're sitting in Lewiston, Idaho. And the town grew around that. It's just a matter of a lot of hardware stores, livery stables, a lot of bars and brothels, you name it, they had it. But it supplied the miners. One of the things about Lewiston history, many people don't realize that it's not a boring town. I've heard that many years from many students. The town is boring, there's nothing to do. But they don't seem to realize of how much was done in this community.
Well, how can any town be boring that started out as a gold mining town? Stories are from that time period that you put your lamp and you turn it off at night, because if you were inside your tent, you were a silhouette, and a silhouette was good target practice. So there was a murder almost every night, because guys, the men would get drunk and start popping away with their revolvers at these guys walking around inside their tents, illuminated as a shadow on the tent. So that seems like pretty extreme living in that time period.
These are places where the first women doctors practiced in the state. We have situations where this is the site of the first flight of an aircraft in the state. All kinds of situations, technology, culture, medicine, science were first done here in Lewiston, Idaho.
You have to remember when it happened too. 1861 it was named Lewiston. 1862, 1863, this was the territorial capital of Idaho, the new territory of Idaho. And so that was very specific that Lewiston would become the territorial capital.
That's how Lewiston got started, by accident, as a second choice, and now you have this historic community.
Abraham Lincoln knew about the gold. He wanted that gold to go down the Snake, go down the Columbia, hit Portland, be transferred to a federal ship and taken to the San Francisco Mint, because he needed the money to finance the Civil War. So these steamboats were taking millions of dollars worth of gold.
They had a large quantity of gold came out of the Clearwater area, but it was a short-lived gold strike. It would be another 35 years before a major gold strike was in this area in Buffalo Hump, which is above Elk River, Elk City, up that area. But it would be a long time before they had the techniques to extract it. They were going for the easy stuff, and there wasn't a lot of that in this area. They weren't, we call them miners, but they were really using sluice boxes and panning for gold more than anything else. Well, when the city was originally founded, it was founded on the Nez Perce Reservation, which did not permit permanent structures.
It was called a tent city. It was called Ragtown when it first started. Lewiston is situated at that time in 1861, 62, it was situated on Indian reservation. And so this was all part of the Nez Perce Reservation. And so they could not put permanent buildings up.
It was the Indian reservation, the treaty wouldn't allow it. So what people would do is they would build kind of quasi-permanent.
And so what they did was they used canvas for the roofs, and they used tents.
They'd get wooden floors, and you'd build up about, on the side, you build up maybe 5 feet. And then above that, you just put rafters and put a tent over the top. And so at night, when people had their fires going and their wood stoves and stuff, you'd just flicker. You see all these tents just flickering in the light, like silhouettes all over the place. The town looked very unusual when you looked at it up on Normal Hill looking down. There are a few people that commented about that, but everything was very temporary.
The first hotel in town was a Luna House and had a canvas top. Second was the Hotel de France, and it was in a circus tent, an old circus tent that they had bought and purchased. So in 1862, that shows up in the photograph, a circus tent, and there's a sign that says Hotel de France.
The Luna House. It sat where the museum is today, in the same configuration as the building. The museum runs east-west. The original hotel was a tarpaulin top with wooden sides, and it sat east-west. Then they rebuilt it, and it sat north-south. So a lot of people look at the picture and think the picture is wrong. No, that was the second building, and it was used up to 1889. The county bought it in 1882 and used it as a courthouse. And then when Latah County split off and built a new courthouse, the county here thought, well, we better build a new courthouse. So they built one down at 13th and Main, where we have a courthouse today. The old courthouse, much of it is still inside what we call the new one. It was the new one was kind of built around it. But the Hotel de France began in the very early days of the city. 1861, 1862 as a tent hotel, because it wasn't legal to build a permanent building on the reservation. So they were very just tent roofs and little wood siding and stuff. I lived in one of those just like that when I was a boy up in the mountains. So it was very comfortable. So that was very common in the 1860s and 70s. There were more brothels in this town than you can shake a stick at. 18 at one time.
Well, it was in every gold mining town in America. It was in every town that is associated with extraction industry. You'll find the history of prostitution. And remember, it was legal. And it was legal in Lewiston. It wasn't illegal. It was just part of life. It was encouraged on the frontier.
You know where Morgan's Alley is today? The whole second floor was all brothels. We never had streetwalkers in Lewiston. Okay, that was not big city, just a streetwalker. That they were actually homes that they were called, on the old maps, they were called female boarding houses. They were brothels. Everybody knew it.
Because the men were so wild, and there was no moderating effect.
If a high school band needed new uniforms, they knew where to get money. Local brothels would sponsor them. It was just the way done. I mean, it was.
So they shipped women up the river on one of the steamboat, and by the time that ship got here, the steamboat, they weren't on there because every stop along the way, there was a contingent of officials and men saying, tell them to get off here. They're going to get really well paid.
One of the interesting stories about this is in the 1940s, Dr. Edward Hoffman used to be a physician here. When in the 1940s, he was the public health officer for Nez Perce County, and he would put on little seminars in STDs. So Dr. Hoffman was putting on these things. He'd be in the Bollinger Hotel in the dining room, and he'd be doing this speech and doing kind of presentation to talk about being tested and all that thing. And a lot of guys would be kind of looking past him, kind of looking past him, looking at Dr. Hoffman. He kept wondering what was going on. Well, they're on D Street. He turns around, and here is a prostitute on the landing on the second floor of Morgan's Alley doing a striptease for the guys. Right. No wonder they weren't paying attention.
If you had sailors that came in here that were going to be on a submarine going and fighting, then you didn't want that guy to take that disease on board a small submarine and give it to everybody else. And so the federal government came and said it was off limits, and they were going to change things.
You could not come to Lewiston for 3 years during World War II and just a little after because it was off limits. Only if you lived here could you come back home. Where's your hometown? Get out of here. It doesn't say Lewiston. You're out of town.
And the federal government did that specifically in the valley because during World War II they were training naval officers and flyers at the Clarkston airfield.
So when Lewiston finally got their belly full of all this, and it was hurting their reputation, they really clamped down on it. And what did it do? It went into Clarkston. So there were a lot of very open brothels. They were called massage parlors or whatever you call it, spas. But they were nothing more than brothels in Clarkston.
The limitation on prostitution in the valley centered, well, I should say Lewiston and Clarkston, centered around World War II and specific to training sailors and soldiers and flyers. Had they not been here, it would not have gone away.
When the Idaho Territory was formed in March of 1863, Abraham Lincoln appointed William Wallace, who was the governor of the Washington Territory, to come over and govern the new territory. He lived in Steilacoom on the coast near Olympia. Now, the easiest place for him to get to was not the Boise Basin. That was very difficult to get to. There were no railroads, and there was no river traffic that far up the Snake. But he could get to Lewiston. So he came to Lewis and said, listen, this is where we're going to start the government, right here. He rented a building for his office. He stayed at a local hotel. He did not want to stay here very long. It would only be a few months later before he was the delegate for the territory back in Washington, D.C. He stayed about 5 months. Okay, it wasn't very long. What happens is then now the territorial legislature has to meet. They have to meet in the capital city, which is Lewiston. So they all come here in December of 1863. Wallace is already gone. He's back in Washington, D.C. He has an acting governor. They meet and try to pass a bill to move the capital to Boise. Remember, the big gold strikes in the Boise Basin had drawn people away from here, and they were living around the Boise area. Boise was unincorporated. Idaho was an incorporated city. Boise was not. So Lewiston was, they were feeling like, we're a little bit better than a little scrub town. The territorial legislature had some votes to move the capital, but it got tabled. There was enough opposition to it because there weren't a lot of counties in the territory. Now, the territory was all of Montana, almost all of Wyoming, what we know as Wyoming, and then all of Idaho. So you're looking at a huge block of the United States was just in the territory. Getting here to Lewiston was a real problem unless you lived real close. The issue got tabled. The territorial legislature comes back in November of 1864, many people feeling that it came too early, that it didn't have the right to meet in November. According to the Organic Act, it was supposed to meet later. But they had the vote. They had agreed to meet in November. And the problem is the local legislators in this area came and met. They obviously knew when it was going to be. During the last legislature, they had created more counties. Guess where the counties were? Southern Idaho. You come back to your next session, who has the votes? Southern Idaho. The vote for Montana was cut out. Montana had been made a territory. They couldn't depend on the Montana vote anymore. So the vote went through. Well, they fought it on the basis of when the act was passed, which was on December the 7th, 1864, which by all intents and purposes was too early. They couldn't pass legislation in December. So they got an injunction. Well, it went back and forth, and they locked the seal and the territorial papers in the local jail. And by this time, they sent in a new acting governor because the old governor had fled town. He took off. He wasn't going to stick around for all this. He didn't want to get thrown in jail. There was an injunction against him. So he said, I'm taking off. So the new acting secretary and governor comes into town. He's all nice. Everybody thinks they like him. But then one morning in March of 1865, he walks into town, but he's not alone. He had a troop of cavalry from Fort Lapwai. And they took control of the ferries across the Clearwater, across the Snake. They were going to have complete control of egress and ingress into the city. Territorial secretary went down to the jail, broke the lock off, took all the stuff. Here's the city marshal waving. He said, I got an injunction against you. And they just said, we don't care. And the army took off. They hit the ferries and on the way to Boise. Well, they got to Boise in April. The only problem is the big news on the front page was Abraham Lincoln being assassinated. Wasn't front page news. Here they go for Capitol. It was upheld by the Territorial Supreme Court. When they finally got into session on a vote of 2-1, the decision was never written down. We only know it from a few notes. It was never formally put into print. This is a very interesting case.